You know, some stories just don't have an ending. And deep in the woods of Vermont, one of those stories started to unfold back in the 1940s. It's a strange one. People would just walk into the wilderness around this one mountain, and then poof, they just cease to exist. So yeah, let's dive right into one of America's most unsettling mysteries.
Okay, so for a lot of people, this whole thing really kicks off with a young woman named Paula Weldon. She was just 18, a college student, and on December 1st, 1946, she tells her roommate, "Hey, I'm going for a long walk." Simple enough, right? Well, she was spotted on the trail. But here's the thing. Like this local paper pointed out, she was dressed completely wrong for the weather. We're talking frigid temperatures, and she's in a light jacket and sneakers. And then, just like that, she was gone. And here's where it gets really chilling. Paula, she wasn't the only one. Her vanishing was actually part of this deeply disturbing pattern. I mean, get this, in just 5 years, 5 different people disappeared in this one tiny area. And they were all so different. You have a 74-year-old hunting guide, a guy who knew the woods like the back of his hand. You have a veteran who literally vanished from a moving bus. He was there one second, gone the next. An 8-year-old boy, another hiker, 5 people, 5 disappearances, and only one body was ever found, and that was months later, in a spot they'd already searched top to bottom. It just doesn't add up.
So this patch of southwestern Vermont with Glastonbury Mountain right at its heart, it eventually got a name. An author, Joseph A. Citro, came along and dubbed it something that honestly perfectly captures how strange all this is. He called it the Bennington Triangle.
All right, so to really get our heads around this, let's start at the beginning, at the core of the mystery. Let's talk about this vanishing point. What happened? And maybe, more importantly, what didn't happen?
And that's the thing that's just so mind-bending about all of this, the absolute lack of anything. The searches were huge, especially for the 1940s. I mean, you had volunteers, state police, the FBI even got involved with Paula Weldon's case. And what did they find? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No bodies, no scraps of clothing, no clues. It was just an empty forest.
You know, this total absence of evidence, it brings up a really fascinating question. It's like we're staring into a forensic void. So it makes you wonder, right? What if this happened today?
Let's just imagine for a second. If Paula Weldon went missing today, not in 1946, how would that search be different? What would investigators actually do? Because let me tell you, the difference in the tech and the techniques they have now, it is absolutely staggering.
I mean, look at this comparison. It's night and day. Back then, a search was basically just a big line of volunteers combing through the woods on foot, hoping to get lucky. Today? Oh man, the FBI could roll in with teams doing 3D laser scans of the entire scene. They could build a perfect digital map of the whole area using GIS. Any little piece of potential evidence would go through a whole battery of forensic tests. It's a completely different ballgame.
And just think about the tools themselves for a second. Soil exams? They could match a tiny bit of dirt on a suspect's boot to the exact spot someone went missing. Latent prints? A single fingerprint left on a branch or a rock could be all they need to ID someone. And remember Frida Langer, the one person whose remains were found? With modern anthropological analysis, they could build a full biological profile, maybe even figure out how she died. Things that were just impossible back in 1951.
So you really have to wonder, right? Is a huge piece of this mystery just a product of its time? The original investigations were completely stuck in that forensic void. They just didn't have the tools that we see as totally standard today.
Okay, but let's be real. Even with all our fancy modern tools, maybe the missing evidence isn't the whole story. We kind of need to zoom out a bit, look at this through a totally different lens. What if it wasn't just the people who were disappearing?
And that question, that's what takes us out of the crime lab and into the history books. We're shifting from forensics to the sociology of the place itself. Because maybe, just maybe, to figure out what happened to the people, you first have to understand what was happening to the land they were on.
And a good way to frame this is through an idea you might have heard of: urban renewal. Now, usually we think of that as a city thing, right? Tearing down old buildings to build new ones. But the core idea, abandoning places that are seen as decaying or blighted, that is absolutely key to this story.
Because that is exactly what was happening right there in the Bennington Triangle. The main towns, Glastonbury and Somerset, they used to be booming logging centers. But by the 1940s, they were essentially ghost towns. In fact, in 1937, the state officially unincorporated them. They were literally, legally erased from the map. I mean, think about that. It adds this whole other layer to the mystery, doesn't it? Long before any people went missing, the place itself was already vanishing. It was a place of decline, of abandonment. So the physical disappearances, they happened in a location that had already, in a way, disappeared from society.
All right, we've looked at the science, we've looked at the history. Now, for our third and final perspective, let's get a little weird. Let's really push the boundaries here.
So far, we've stayed pretty grounded. We've talked about practical stuff, historical stuff. But with a mystery this deep, this empty of clues, you almost have to entertain some more radical ideas. What if the answer isn't something we'd normally consider?
Okay, here's a word for you: retrocausality. It's a wild concept that comes out of philosophy and, believe it or not, theoretical physics. And what it does is it takes our normal understanding of cause and effect and just flips it completely on its head.
Yeah, you heard that right. To put it as simply as possible, it's the future affecting the past. And look, before you dismiss this as pure science fiction, you should know that at the quantum level, things get really weird. The famous physicist Richard Feynman, for instance, he proposed that a positron is basically just an electron moving backward in time. It suggests that this strict one-way arrow of time that we all experience, it might not be a fundamental rule of the universe at all. At the tiniest levels, it could be a lot more flexible.
Now, let's be super clear here. This does not mean some future event reached back in time and made these people disappear. Retrocausality isn't an answer to the mystery. But in a case that is defined by having zero known cause, it's a really powerful way to think. It's a thought experiment that lets us ask a really wild question. What if we're looking for the cause in the wrong direction on the timeline?
So, in the end, what is the Bennington Triangle? What are we really looking at here? Is it just a handful of tragic cold cases that honestly would have been solved in a week with today's technology? Or is it something deeper? A story about a forgotten place, a region that was disappearing long before the people did? Or could it be something else? Something that hints that reality itself isn't as solid as we think. A genuine glitch in the system where the normal rules just break. The truth is, we don't know. And that answer, just like those 5 people who walked into the woods all those years ago, is still missing.